Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, where you can shop online and get easy delivery or free pickup. Get the same prices, deals, and rewards as in-store. Shop the weekly ad, clip deals, and earn points at Safeway.com or in the Safeway app.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.
The bells you're hearing are in honor of Pope Francis, who I'm sure you know by now, died yesterday morning. These bells rang at a service to remember him at the Cathedral Basilica of the Immaculate Conception in Denver. You can find information about local vigils and events in Colorado on the link in our show notes. I'm Arlo Perez Esquivel. Coming up, a new target for the federal budget cuts, AmeriCorps, the community service organization.
He called the homeowner over and started apologizing to her that we wouldn't be able to finish the work.
Then, you'll start to notice more birds migrating in the next couple of weeks. Millions of their lives can be saved with the click of a switch. 600 million, that is a huge number.
Yeah, 600 million is a really big proportion of deaths that we see across all types of causes.
Plus, 420 was this past weekend. Do you know what's inside the cannabis you enjoyed?
Even in places like Colorado, we can't study a lot of the plants that people are actually using.
It's Tuesday, April 22nd. Here's the news in Colorado today. The Federal Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, has set its sights on AmeriCorps, a volunteer organization. It has put most of their national staff on leave. It's gotten rid of one of the major programs that gave young people experience in disaster recovery, and it's ended help for communities in Colorado as well as across the country. CPR's Caitlin Kim is here. She spoke to an AmeriCorps volunteer who had to return home to Cannon City when DOGE cut the program.
Right. I met Noe Felix Burns, who thought he'd be in Vinton, Iowa this week, getting ready for his next assignment as a member of AmeriCorps' National Civilian Community Corps. That part of AmeriCorps, however, has been paused completely now. So the 19-year-old is back home in southern Colorado.
That sounds like it'd be really disappointing for him. What do you know about the extent of these cuts overall?
Yeah, so the part of AmeriCorps Burns was part of, the Civilian Community Corps, employed about 2,000 young adults ages 18 to 26, sending them across the country to respond to natural disasters or help with community projects. This part of AmeriCorps was entirely federally funded, which I think is probably why it's the part that was cut first. Here's Burns.
DOGE came into our headquarters last week, from what I've been told, and told us that they thought we weren't efficient enough, so they cut our staff by 75% and sent all volunteers home.
So I should point out there are two other major AmeriCorps volunteer programs still running, but since DOGE cut such a large chunk of the federal AmeriCorps staff last week as well, it's unclear what will happen with them. AmeriCorps has been the subject of scrutiny by some Republicans in the past. They've called into question AmeriCorps' fiscal management and just how much return on taxpayer dollars it provides.
Other individuals that have gone through these cuts receive the news in weird ways. How did Burns receive it?
Burns was actually at a work site in Pennsylvania helping repair homes damaged from Hurricane Ida in 2021 when the news came down. And like I said, he was back in Colorado by Friday.
I thought our site supervisor was joking. Until he told us, we asked him, well, should we finish cleaning up? He's like, no, get your stuff. We got to go now. And then he called the homeowner over and started apologizing to her that we wouldn't be able to finish the work.
It helps a lot of young people get their first taste of a work setting. Burns said he was learning a lot, not just how to repair houses, but about different people in different parts of the country and the challenges they're up against. He said the program, even with only 3 months experience in it, helped him grow as a person. It also helps create a culture of community service. Burns graduated from high school last year and was trying to figure out what to do next when he learned about AmeriCorps and applied. He wanted to help people and get some real-world work experience, and he thought it'd be good for him to work at AmeriCorps, and then that might help him get someplace like the Red Cross or become an EMT. Now, AmeriCorps does provide an educational award when members finish their tours, which Burns had hoped to use to attend Pueblo Community College. He's getting a prorated amount, about a quarter of what he would have received if he'd been able to finish the entire length of service.
Let's talk political pushback. Is there any?
There is some. Lieutenant Governor Primavera has called on Congress to keep NCCC and AmeriCorps going, noting that it's helped Colorado in the past. In a statement, she said these actions will impact service members and result in a loss of tax support for working families, wildfire response teams, those who build affordable housing and behavioral health support in our schools. These are the people behind the numbers, and the work they do matters deeply.
What kind of prisons do they have in Colorado?
Bigger than you might think. Last year, more than 6,600 AmeriCorps volunteers served at 700 local sites across the state, according to Serve Colorado, which links AmeriCorps with local organizations in Colorado.
CPR's Caitlin Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next few weeks are peak time for bird migration. And scientists say that by turning off your lights for just a few nights around this time of year, you could do your part to save millions of birds' lives. To discuss this, we are talking to Miko Jimenez, who recently finished his PhD at Colorado State University. Thank you for joining us, Miko.
Thanks so much for having me, Arlo.
Miko, when I usually think of birds, I think about early mornings, but what you're telling me is I should associate them with nighttime.
Yeah, that's right. When you typically think about birders, you think about people going out early in the morning, right? But really what they're seeing is the aftermath. Most birds across the Western Hemisphere are actually migrating under the cover of darkness at night. For the longest time, we didn't know that much about migration. There used to be people who thought that birds would go to the moon or that they'd hide under the mud for the winter. But over time, we've realized that birds are actually migrating, across the entire Western Hemisphere in really large numbers. And on any given night, we can see, hundreds of millions of birds migrating across the continent, really.
They've been doing that for millennia, but we currently have artificial lights. What do those do to bird migration?
Yeah, it's a really good question because we know that these artificial lights at night are a really novel stimulus for a lot of birds, right? They've been migrating for millions of years. The moon and the stars were really the only lights that they would see at night. As we've kind of expanded the human footprint, you can imagine it's very disorienting for migratory birds. We know that every year, about 600 million birds die by running into kind of anthropogenic structures. And part of what we know about that is that lights often attract birds to areas with a lot of structures.
600 million, that is a huge number.
Yeah, 600 million is a really big proportion of deaths that we see across all types of causes.
Miko, I know that you're part of the Aero Eco Lab and that part of your job is to count birds. But if they're migrating under the cover of darkness, like you mentioned, how exactly do you count them?
One of the things that I do is that I take a portable radar out across Colorado.
I have actually seen that radar. It's so small it can fit in the back of a pickup truck, right?
Yeah, it's a tool that we can pretty reliably use. And so, I go to remote places across the state and I literally watch birds passing over on this radar as it's detecting them kind of move overhead. And one of the cooler things that we found is that there are these really strong pulses of migration. So about 80% of migration actually happens within just a handful of nights per year.
So if we were to focus just on those nights, we would help millions of birds.
Exactly. And on those particularly big nights, if we can kind of enlist the public to reduce the amount of light that they're emitting, we can have that kind of outsized impact from a conservation standpoint and really keep birds safe as they move over our cities.
So then for our listeners who want to save birds, when is the next big migration?
So it should be picking up in these next couple of weeks. Here in Colorado, early May is really the peak of migration. We're going to start to see a lot of birds moving over. So I would just tell listeners to get out there and experience migration firsthand. Go see those migrants that are coming through your houses and where you live. And if you can, pay attention to Birdcast, which is a site that helps show you the predictions of bird migration on any given night. And on those really big nights on migration, really think about turning off your lights to help protect birds.
That is birdcast.info. Miko Jimenez, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Arlo.
420 was just a couple days ago, and statistically, about 20% of Coloradans use cannabis. That might explain why one listener reached out to us asking for a scientific look at the plant.
Yeah, so we're at one of the greenhouses on campus.
For Colorado Wonders, I visited a scientist who studies plants. Among those, weed.
Yeah, so here I'm just watering a lot of different species.
Nolan Kane is a plant geneticist at CU Boulder.
All of our cannabis has to be grown in places where we have all the right certifications. And,
he studies the DNA of cannabis plants and the chemistry inside them.
Oh, there's definitely hundreds of different compounds in cannabis.
But before we get into the chemical alphabet soup,
THCA, CBDA, THC,
let's zoom out.
CBG.
Your nervous system has these special receptors that are wired to respond to the chemicals in cannabis.
So some lead to less perception of pain, some lead to sleepiness, some lead to more alertness.
And it's by causing these that cannabis has long been considered to have medical potential. Cannabis has shown promise in areas like managing pain, treating epilepsy. It may even slow down the progression of Parkinson's disease, just to name a few. But there's a critical nuance here. It's not a single chemical that is solely responsible for these effects. Instead, it's the intricate way that the alphabet soup,
CBDV,
those hundreds of chemicals in cannabis, interact.
CBCA.
To understand how hundreds of compounds interact with the human body, well, that requires time, resources, and most of all, access. And that's where things get tricky.
Even in places like Colorado, we can't study a lot of the plants that people are actually using. We are only allowed to study a very restricted set of plants, and those plants have very low levels of any of the relevant compounds.
Even when labs can study the strains that are sold in dispensaries, it's complicated. Because in most places, even strain names are not standardized. So one dispensary's, Girl Scout cookies might be completely different from another's. And then, even small differences, like how it's stored, can change its chemical makeup completely. Now, in a different world, this might just be frustrating. But in this world, where people use cannabis to manage pain, anxiety, PTSD, that unknown is a concern. After all, how can you prescribe something where you're not completely sure of its effects?
Unfortunately, a lot of that research is really only just beginning. There's going to be a lot of valuable and interesting information coming out of a lot of these studies in the future. We are definitely starting to understand that this complexity is important, but we don't know enough to understand the complexity yet.
But for scientists like Kane, there is still a lot to be excited about.
The neat thing about cannabis is that it seems to operate on pain in ways that's very different from opioids. For the last however many thousand years, people have figured out their effects simply by their own experience. And ultimately, for now, that may be the necessary way of understanding this plant.
If you're curious about something in our state, submit it through Colorado Wonders and we'll try to find the answer. Follow the link in our show notes. Hey, thanks for listening. And while you're thinking of it, have you told 5 friends about how much you're enjoying Colorado today? If you can, leave a review in your app or tell some friends. It'll really help people discover the show. I'm Arlo Perez Esquivel. This is CPR News.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, where teachers can save 5% every day. Download the Safeway app and verify your teacher status for exclusive offers and discounts. Get started at Safeway.com or in the Safeway app.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.